Coming up on Network Africa, the United Nations co-hosts the first ever Global Refugee Forum to improve responses to refugee situations. The United States sanctions two prominent South Sudan officials. Plus, residents of Belet, Weyne in Somalia try to return to normal life as flood waters recede. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. The United Nations is co-hosting with Switzerland the first ever Global Refugee Forum aimed at transforming the way the world responds to refugee situations. The gathering underway in Geneva brings together refugees, heads of states and government, UN leaders, international institutions, development organizations, business leaders and civil society representatives at the home of the United Nations office. The UNHCR is co-hosting the forum together with Switzerland, and it is being co-convened by Costa Rica, Ethiopia, Germany, Pakistan and Turkey. According to UNHCR, the aim of the forum is to generate new approaches and long-term commitments from a variety of actors to help refugees and the communities in which they live. Worldwide, over 70 million people are displaced by war, conflicts and persecution. The UNHCR also says sub-Saharan Africa hosts more than 26% of the world's refugee population.
Their most vulnerable moments, and they shared with me their suffering, their yearnings, their anger. And I could never return to the comfort of my own house without feeling shaken and frustrated myself. And I've always been amazed by the generosity of least developed and middle-income countries that have hosted millions of refugees with very little support from the international community, but with an enormous generosity. And I learned that generosity is not always proportional to wealth. Indeed, at a time when the right to asylum is under assault, when so many borders and doors are being closed to refugees, when even child refugees can be divided from their families, we need to reaffirm the human rights of refugees. And the Global Compact on Refugees gives us the blueprint. And this forum is an opportunity to give the implementation of the Compact energy and dynamism by drawing together the expertise, ideas, resources, commitments and new forms of collaboration that will drive it forward. I urge you to be bold and concrete in the pledges you will make. This is a moment for ambition. It is a moment to jettison a model of support that too often left refugees for decades with their lives on hold, confined to camps, just scraping by, unable to flourish or contribute.
Let's discuss more on this. Joining us now is a human rights activist, Olatunji Lanre Barua. Thank you for joining us. What are your thoughts on the initiation of this first ever Global Refugee Forum aimed at tackling the refugee crisis?
I'm excited. I'm really elated about this. If you remember, Filippo Grandi, the UN Commissioner for Refugees, has been talking this up for some months now. And it's a good thing that it is happening in the presence of Turkey. Turkey is the host of the largest number of refugees worldwide, with Syria present. Syria has the highest number of displaced people across the world. And we have countries like Afghanistan that have been involved in one of the longest running conflicts or internal conflicts. And this is a good thing. The world needed to stand up. The world needed to move beyond the Global Compact for Refugee, which came into effect earlier this year or late last year. And it's a good, we'll wait and see some of the decisions that will be taken from here. But this is a very good development for displaced people and refugees worldwide.
Yeah, according to UN the UN Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. The aim of this forum is to transform the way the world responds to refugee situations. How well would you say the current response is? And do you think there is room for improvement?
Well, one, the first part, the current response has been very poor. You see the wave of right-wing movement across the world, the wave upsurge in the rise of nationalism across the world is because of refugees and displaced people and migrants. That's what has led to that. And if there's room for improvement, there is always room for improvement. There's room for improvement. We need to start talking about giving access to basic amenities to displaced people and refugees. We need to start talking about allowing education to continue for the children among them. About 70 million people displaced worldwide, about 26 million of them are refugees. And out of that, about 60% of those people are people under the age of 18, meaning that their education has stopped. They are not able to go to school. So the fact that people fled their countries and their places of residence because of conflict does not mean that their life should stop altogether. So what the world needs to do is coming together like what we are having right now, the Global Refugees Forum, and to discuss on ways of granting access to education, granting access, to documentation. People should not become stateless because they have been displaced, and granting access to basic amenities in their host countries, and that is very important.
Okay, finally, before I let you go, many Africans are refugees and asylum seekers in mainly European countries for numerous reasons. What is the solution to this exodus? Because Africa is not new to the refugee crisis. It's prevalent here.
We've talked about, we've tried to find solutions to the refugee crisis in Africa for some time. And, we will always be saddled with this crisis, exodus into Western Europe, to other countries, if we continue to have them to that governance. The governance system needs to improve. As much as African Union is talking about economic integration and free movement of people, continental free trade agreement, we need to start talking about good governance. Good governance should be on the table. Democracy should be on the table. It's not every country in Africa that is democratic. Some are monarchy and another system of government. Beyond democracy, we need to have good governance. We need to have countries commit to fighting corruption. And we need to put in place a social security system that serves the interest of the people. Because most of the migrants are economic opportunity, most of the African exodus into Europe is for economic reasons. They want to pasture. And the only reason for that is because you feel hopeless where you are. And until Africa rises up and tackle governance, tackle social security, when people get hold, they are just left on their own. There's a whole lot of problems, and good governance will be one of the quickest things we can place for the African Union.
All right, thank you very much, Olatunji Lanre-Barua, for joining us on the program. Olatunji Lanre-Barua is a human rights activist. Moving on to other stories now, the United States has criticized government in West Africa's Sahel region for failing to do more to combat the worsening Islamist violence. The U.S. Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations, Cheryl Norman Chalet, told the Security Council that Mali in particular had made little progress in implementing a peace deal. She said West African leaders needed to be more inclusive and accountable. The Security Council briefing on violent extremism in the Sahel follows an attack last week by the Islamic State group on a military base in western Niger, where 71 soldiers were killed. The International Monetary Fund has approved the release of about $368 million to the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's the IMF's first resumption of lending to the country since 2012. The IMF had previously suspended a loan program as the government failed to provide sufficient details about the sale of state mining assets. President Felix Tshisekedi had sought to mend frayed relations with foreign donors since taking office in January. Staying with the Democratic Republic of Congo, the country and the World Health Organization has launched the third phase of the measles immunization campaign with the ultimate aim of reaching 18.9 million children across the country by the end of 2019. A measles epidemic has killed 5,000 people this year, most of them children under the age of 5. There are thousands more suspected measles cases, according to the World Health Organization. The Health Ministry says low immunization rates and high levels of malnutrition have fueled the epidemic and high mortality rates, especially in North Kivu province, which is grappling with high insecurity due to ongoing armed rebel attacks. 2.2 million people need to be vaccinated in that area that is also reeling from an Ebola epidemic. The United Nations says it is working closely with local authorities and partners to determine and meet the most urgent needs of Somalis that have been affected by flooding. Now, the waters are receding and the world body is dispatching emergency supplies and providing life-saving services through partners on the ground.
With flood waters receding around Belet, Weyne, residents are trying to return to normal life, but it is no easy task.
Our situation is dire. Our livelihoods have been destroyed. Our children need support. Our food supplies are little. Getting food is a problem.
Jimale and her family are among many taking shelter and receiving aid at a camp for internally displaced persons run by a local NGO with the support of the United Nations humanitarian agencies and Somalia. Jimale's plight is echoed by the governor of Hiran region, which encompasses Belet, Weyne.
We need durable solutions for supporting a water flow protection project. The other important issue is the damaged roads. It is important to restore the roads linking the farms and the areas close to the river.
The Belet Weyne area experienced severe flooding in late October when the Shebelle River burst its banks due to heavy rains. The situation left some 570,000 people flood affected, and of these, more than 350,000 have so far received assistance. A UN official who visited the affected area says Somalia is increasingly vulnerable to climate change.
These rapid shifts between droughts and floods indicate just how sensitive Somalia is to this sort of issue. At the same time, you must keep in mind the fact is that these communities are often already on the edge in terms of decades of poverty and conflict. So having something like this can easily push them over the edge, going from an already bad situation to a much worse situation.
These climate-related events, mainly drought and flooding, have increased in frequency and intensity throughout the country, exacerbating humanitarian needs and undermining community resilience.
The United States has imposed sanctions on 2 senior South Sudanese officials it accuses of fomenting conflict. This is the latest move announced by the U.S. Treasury Department to pressure the country's politicians to form a unity government. Minister of Cabinet Affairs Martin Elia Lomuro and Minister of Defense and Veteran Affairs Kuol Mayang Juk were blacklisted for their role in perpetuating the conflict by obstructing the peace process. The sanctions freeze any U.S. assets held by the officials and prohibits Americans from doing business with them. Angola's Justice Minister says the country has so far this year recovered more than $5 billion stolen from the state. Francisco Cuero said this included $3 billion siphoned from the Sovereign Wealth Fund. He said some countries were obstructing Angola's efforts to track down the looted funds. The son of Angola's former president, José Eduardo dos Santos, who headed the Sovereign Wealth Fund, is on trial for corruption. José Filomeno dos Santos denies the charges. Angolan President João Lourenço has vowed to crack down on the country's massive corruption problem. Well, still to come on the program, we meet Adian Dumuje Abili, considered to be the fastest 8-year-old swimmer in Nigeria. Please stay with us.